Cuba may be small in the heart of the Caribbean, but it's America's very own Achilles heel. Since the Revolution of 1959, the White House has tried every trick in the book to pull this island back into its orbit, aiming to turn Cuba into a strategic satellite. And why? Because of its prime location, right at America's doorstep and the crossroads of the Caribbean. Despite lacking economic wealth or military might, Cuba has kept the U.S. on edge with its unwavering spirit and fierce determination to safeguard its independence. How can such a small nation cause so much trouble for a global superpower? Let's dive in and uncover the mystery. 1. Strategic location. The thorn in America's side. Cuba isn't just a paradise with white sandy beaches, aromatic cigars, and lively salsa rhythms. It's also an island with unmatched strategic importance. Nestled in the Caribbean and just 90 miles, 145 kilometers from Florida, Cuba is a natural checkpoint between the U.S. and the rest of Latin America. From its shores, critical shipping routes to the Panama Canal, a vital artery connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, are within reach. This makes Cuba not just a military foothold, but a linchpin in any regional geopolitical strategy. Historically, Cuba was a trade and transportation hub during Spanish colonial times. By the 20th century, its location became even more critical during the Cold War. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. With Soviet ballistic missiles stationed just minutes away from U.S. soil, Cuba became an unprecedented threat. Imagine a small island, perfectly positioned to monitor and launch operations, targeting the U.S. and the entire Caribbean and Latin America. But Cuba's influence didn't stop at geography. It became a symbol of soft power and revolutionary ideals. Under Fidel Castro's leadership, the Cuban Revolution turned the island into a hub for political influence in the developing world, directly challenging U.S. foreign policy. From supporting liberation movements in Africa and Latin America to serving as a key Soviet ally, Cuba used its position not just to defend itself, but to extend its reach far and wide. This unique combination of geography and a history of defiance made Cuba not just a thorn in America's side, but a major strategic player on the global chessboard. So, what is it about this small island that keeps superpowers on edge? Let's dive in and uncover the fascinating story of Cuba. 2. The Cuban Revolution. Fidel and the legendary beard. Fidel Castro, with his iconic beard, wasn't just the face of the Cuban Revolution. He was also a persistent nightmare for the United States. After leading the revolution to victory in 1959, Fidel transformed Cuba into a socialist nation, right in the backyard of the world's greatest superpower. This wasn't just a slap in the face to America's policy of containing communism, it also sparked fear in Washington that the revolutionary fire from Cuba would spread across all of Latin America, threatening their dominance in the region. In the early years after the revolution, the U.S. made numerous attempts to eliminate Fidel. CIA-led assassination attempts, like Operation Mongoose, were as creative as they were ironic. From exploding cigars to poison in his shoes, yet Fidel survived, becoming a living testament to defying America's might. The Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, where the U.S. backed anti-Castro forces, ended in a humiliating failure, further cementing Fidel's status as a symbol of anti-imperialism. Under Fidel, Cuba didn't just defend itself, it went on the offensive by supporting liberation movements in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. The Cuban military played a crucial role in the 1970s Angola War, helping defeat the apartheid-backed South African forces and supporting liberation movements in Mozambique and Ethiopia. These actions kept America and its allies awake at night and turned Cuba into a global revolutionary hub. At that time, the world was divided by the Cold War, with two superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, locked in a fierce battle for influence. Fidel, with his gift for speech, unwavering resolve, and international vision, made Cuba a valuable strategic pawn for the Soviets while remaining a symbol of uncontrollable independence. He led a small island nation, but had the audacity to challenge a global power structure. Through marathon speeches, Fidel inspired not only the Cuban people, but also liberation movements across the world, fighting against colonialism and imperialism. Those were tense years, not only for Cuba, but for the entire world, which was on the brink of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 marked the peak of Cold War tensions when Fidel allowed the Soviet Union to deploy nuclear missiles on Cuban soil. Just a few minutes' flight from the US, these missiles turned the small island into ground zero for potential annihilation, pushing the world to the edge of a nuclear catastrophe. Under Fidel's leadership, Cuba wasn't just a socialist nation, it became a symbol of resistance and freedom, a beacon for nations struggling across the globe. The story of Fidel isn't just the tale of a revolutionary leader. It's the story of a small nation that altered the course of global history. 3. Cuban culture, salsa, cigars, and the story of revolution. To talk about Cuba without mentioning its culture would be a grave oversight. If you've never heard salsa or tried a Cuban cigar, then you haven't truly experienced Cuba. This nation is not only a revolutionary stronghold, but also a melting pot of unique cultures and traditions from Spain, Africa, and Latin America. Anyone visiting Cuba will surely be unable to forget the sizzling salsa dances. The sight of couples twirling on the streets under dim lights will make you feel like you've stepped into a romantic film. And as you sit back enjoying a cigar at a local bar, you'll realize one thing: Cuba doesn't just sell cigars, it sells a piece of history. Cuban cigars are famous not only for their unique flavor, but also because each cigar tells a story of revolutions, resilience, and a nation that refuses to be subdued. The tales of Cuba are a blend of revolution and art, struggle, and the yearning for freedom. This is the soft power that Cuba employs to shine on the international stage, compelling not just the US, but the entire world to take notice and show respect. 4. Resilience. No McDonald's, no Facebook, but Cuba stands strong. Despite enduring over 60 years of US sanctions, Cuba remains steadfast. This resilience isn't due to vast natural resources, but rather the island's knack for self-sufficiency. Cuba has become a beacon of creativity and independence. While the outside world can't seem to live without McDonald's or Facebook, Cuba has charted a distinctly different course. With vintage cars from the 1950s cruising down the streets, Cuba demonstrates that you don't need the latest technology or the most famous brands to survive. Cubans can craft machinery, produce food, and even develop unique healthcare solutions without relying on external support. A prime example is Cuba's healthcare system. Despite lacking a massive budget for technology, Cuba has developed one of the most effective healthcare systems in the world. This underscores that while Cuba may be materially challenged, it consistently finds innovative solutions to sustain life. 5. Travel to Cuba. Havana, a time portal. Havana, the capital of Cuba, is a place that everyone adores, even if only through Instagram photos. It's a city seemingly untouched by time. The charming streets lined with Spanish-style buildings, classic cars from the 1950s, and the lively salsa music echoing around every corner create an atmosphere you won't find anywhere else. Despite the embargo, Cuba remains an enticing destination for travelers from around the globe. The stunning beaches of Varadero, historical landmarks, and rich culture make Cuba one of the must-visit countries. You won't just be sightseeing, you'll be immersed in the vibrant life of Havana, where every street tells a story and every house holds a piece of history. 6. Military might. Cuba, a natural fortress. Cuba may not boast a military force as powerful as the US or Russia, but it possesses a strategically strong military presence. Throughout the Cold War, Cuba skillfully built a robust defense system, not just through military strength, but also through creative strategies. Notably, when Fidel Castro invited the Soviet Union to place nuclear missiles on the island, the US was forced to confront a missile crisis, a challenge that made them wary every time Cuba appeared on the map. Cuba has shown that a small nation doesn't need to possess weapons of mass destruction to defend itself. It simply requires a sound strategy and unwavering determination. This is what makes Cuba a fortress that is difficult to conquer, both militarily and politically. 7. Cuba's future: transform or stay the same. Cuba currently stands at a crossroads, but not the kind where you stop and scratch your head about which way to go. This is a historical crossroads, where one path leads to an economy that needs to open up to keep pace with the times, while the other is a steadfast socialist regime, as solid as a rock, not easily swayed. With new leadership under Miguel Díaz-Canel, Cuba is attempting to change a bit, not in a way that suggests, tomorrow we will become the Silicon Valley of the Caribbean, but more like, we might allow private cafes to open without needing permission to sell sandwiches. These are small yet revolutionary reforms in a country where selling a chair sometimes requires navigating 3 layers of government approval. However, Cuba still retains its unique essence. It is not a nation easily lured by global inspiration. While the younger generation yearns for high-speed Wi-Fi and free cafes, they haven't forgotten Fidel's famous saying, "Independence or death." And if Cuba doesn't undergo significant changes, it will maintain its spirit and resilience. But will it be able to develop? Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see if that Wi-Fi ever really gets stronger. Conclusion: Cuba, the Achilles heel of the United States. Cuba may not boast supercars or skyscrapers like other world powers, but it possesses something that larger nations sometimes lack: a stubborn head and a heart full of determination. No matter how many sanctions or threats the US throws at it, Cuba stands tall like an oak tree in a storm. And that is the United States' Achilles heel. They can try to isolate Cuba with every measure possible, but Cuba continues to smile, live, and produce cigars of such quality that you simply cannot refuse. Just take a look. Cuba has survived through decades without faltering, while some larger economies can get flustered over a minor banking crisis. Whether Cuba changes or not, it will remain an unmistakable symbol. A symbol of resilience, independence, and a touch of quirkiness. Whether the US likes it or not, Cuba will always be an indelible Achilles heel, and certainly one that cannot be overlooked.